I built my medical clinic from nothing. Years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and loans I'm still paying off. But now that it's thriving, my family suddenly wants a piece, and they expect to get in without ever paying a dime. When you put in the work, the blood, the sweat, and the years, people only see the finished product. They don't see the sacrifices that built it. And worst of all, sometimes your own family feels entitled to your success, even when they never lifted a finger to help. In this story, you'll see how I went from building my clinic brick by brick to facing relatives who wanted to swoop in and take credit, and how I learned the hardest lesson about family, money, and boundaries. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I share real stories of betrayal, entitlement, and quiet revenge. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens here. Part 1. The struggle before success. Success looks glamorous from the outside. Polished floors, bright lights, your name on the front door. But people rarely see the years it took to get there. When people walk into my clinic today, they see order, stability, prosperity. They don't see the struggle, the grind, the nights when I thought I'd never make it. But I remember every detail. The dream that started. Small ever since I was a kid, I dreamed of becoming a doctor. Not for the prestige, not for the money, but because I saw how hard it was for families like mine to get care. My grandparents used to drive hours just to see a physician. My parents put off appointments because we couldn't afford them. I promised myself I'd change that someday, that I'd build something, a clinic that helped people like us. But dreams are free. The price tag comes later. Medical school nearly broke me. Tuition alone felt like an anchor pulling me under. While classmates leaned on family support, I worked night shifts at diners, scraped together scholarships, and took on loans that seemed endless. There were nights I fell asleep over textbooks, my dinner half-eaten beside me. Days when I walked into exams with shaking hands from too much coffee and not enough sleep. And through all of this, my family wasn't there. Not once did anyone ask, "Do you need help with books?" Or, "Do you have enough to eat?" In fact, the few times I mentioned struggling, the answer was always the same. "You wanted this. You figure it out." So I did. Alone. After graduation, the sacrifices didn't stop. I took every shift I could get at overcrowded hospitals. I covered weekends, holidays, back-to-back nights. Patients blurred together, my body ran on fumes, but my bank account barely moved. Meanwhile, my family watched from afar. They never visited to check on me. They never offered help when I missed holidays because I was working. But when they introduced me at gatherings, they bragged, "This is our doctor." I was good enough to brag about, not good enough to support. I lived like a monk. A studio apartment with secondhand furniture, cheap meals, no vacations, no luxuries. Every extra dollar went toward one goal, the clinic. While my friends posted photos from trips abroad, I posted none. While they bought new cars, I patched up my old one with duct tape and prayers, because I knew, one day, the struggle would be worth it. The first step toward the clinic after years of grinding, I finally scraped together enough to rent a tiny space. It wasn't glamorous. The paint peeled. The waiting area had 3 mismatched chairs. My exam room was barely larger than a closet, but it was mine. The sign outside read, "My name Community Clinic." And for the first time in my life, I felt like my dream wasn't just a fantasy. When I told my family I had opened the clinic, their reaction was lukewarm. "Oh, that's nice," my mother said flatly, like I had baked a pie instead of building a career. My father added, "Don't get cocky. Lots of businesses fail. No congratulations, no flowers, no offers to help." I swallowed the disappointment and pushed forward, because I wasn't building this for them. I was building it for me and for the people who needed it. The first months were brutal. Patients trickled in slowly. I handled everything myself. Appointments, billing, even cleaning the floors at night. Some nights I slept in the office, my head on the desk, too tired to drive home. I doubted myself constantly. But then I'd remember why I started. For the families who couldn't afford long drives, for the people who deserved care, And little by little, it worked. Word spread. Patients returned. Slowly, the clinic grew. Back then, my family barely cared. They didn't visit. They didn't call. They didn't even ask how it was going. But I should have known. Success acts like a magnet, and the moment my clinic started thriving, the same family that left me to struggle would come knocking. Not with help, not with gratitude, but with entitlement. And when they did, I'd be ready. Part 2. Building the clinic. The first year of running the clinic nearly broke me. People see the polished version now. Bright lights, clean waiting rooms, smiling patients. But back then, it was chaos. A one-person show, fueled by determination and exhaustion. I wore every hat. Doctor, receptionist, janitor, accountant. Some days I'd see patients from dawn until night, then spend hours cleaning, filing paperwork, and balancing bills. I couldn't afford staff at first. The phone rang, nonstop, and if I didn't pick up, appointments were lost. Sometimes I treated patients with gloves bought from the dollar store because I couldn't order in bulk yet. And at the end of the day, I'd collapse into the creaky chair in my office, wondering if I was insane to keep going. But then, I'd think of the patients, the elderly man who hugged me because I caught his heart condition early. The young mother who cried when I treated her sick child for free because she couldn't pay. The teenager who came in alone, scared, and left smiling because someone had finally listened. Those faces reminded me why I was here. Why I couldn't quit. Month by month, things improved. I reinvested every dollar, bought better equipment, hired one part-time nurse, repainted the walls. I upgraded the waiting area from 3 mismatched chairs to 6 actual seats that looked like they belonged together. It was slow, but it was progress. Word spread. The community started trusting me. People recommended my clinic to friends, neighbors, co-workers. My schedule began to fill. For the first time, I had to turn people away because there weren't enough hours in the day. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real growth. Through all this, my family barely acknowledged the clinic. They knew it existed, sure, but they didn't ask about it. They didn't visit. They didn't offer support. At family dinners, when I tried to talk about my progress, the subject was quickly changed. Elise's new promotion, my cousin's wedding, someone else's vacation, my achievements were invisible. And I learned to stop bringing them up. Everything changed in year 3. By then, the clinic had grown from a struggling startup to a thriving business. I hired more staff, expanded into 2 additional rooms, and finally, had a proper office. The waiting room stayed full. The phones rang off the hook. For the first time, I paid myself a decent salary. Not extravagant, but enough to feel secure. I upgraded my car, moved into a nicer apartment, and for once, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. And that's when my family noticed. At first, it was small comments. Looks like business is going well. I saw your name mentioned in the local paper. Must be nice. You're really making something of yourself, huh? Then came the visits. My parents just happened to be in the area and dropped by the clinic. They looked around with wide eyes, complimenting the decor they had once ignored. Relatives started calling, asking about jobs. Do you need a receptionist? My daughter is looking for work. Or, could you make me a partner? I've always wanted to be part of something big. It was strange. For years, they had ignored my struggle. Now, suddenly, they couldn't stop talking about my success. I knew something had shifted when I went to a family reunion. Relatives I hadn't seen in years came up to me saying, "Your parents won't stop bragging about your clinic." One aunt said, "They told everyone you're the pride of the family now." Now. Not when I was sleeping in my office. Not when I was eating instant noodles to save money. Not when I was drowning in loans. Now, when the clinic looked impressive. At first, I brushed it off. I thought, maybe they're just proud in their own way. But deep down, I felt uneasy. Because the attention didn't feel like pride. It felt like positioning, like they were slowly circling something they hadn't built, waiting for their chance to claim it. And soon enough, I would learn. That's exactly what they were doing. Part 3. The entitlement. Success doesn't just draw admiration, it draws entitlement. The same people who watched me struggle in silence suddenly reappeared when the clinic started thriving. And the shift was obvious. Overnight, I wasn't just a relative. I was an opportunity. It started with my uncle. He dropped by the clinic one afternoon, unannounced, all smiles. "You've really made something here," he said, strolling through the waiting area like he owned the place. "Feels like a family legacy, doesn't it?" I frowned. "A legacy?" "Of course," he said smoothly. "Businesses like this, they should be kept in the family. You should make us partners. We can all benefit." Partners. From a man who hadn't even visited once in the early years, who hadn't lifted a finger or offered a dime. I kept my voice calm. "Partnerships require investment," he laughed. "Come on, we're family, you don't need money from us. Just put our names on the paperwork." One called me up. "Hey, I hear you're hiring. I'd be perfect as a manager." "Do you have any experience?" I asked. "No, but I'm family. That should count for something." Another messaged me. "I don't want to be stuck in retail forever. Can you make me a consultant or something? Easy hours, good pay. Consultant." As if running a medical clinic was a side hustle that needed vague titles. But the worst part was my parents. For years, they had been indifferent. Now, suddenly, they acted as if the clinic was theirs too. At dinner one night, my father cleared his throat. "We think you should rename it. Use the family surname. Make it a true family brand." My mother added, "And you should set aside part of the profits for family needs. Emergencies, celebrations, things like that. It's only right." I stared at them. "You didn't invest in this clinic. You didn't build it." My father waved a hand. "We raised you. That counts. So feeding me as a child was now equity. In my adult business?" When I pushed back, the guilt trip started. "You're being selfish. Don't forget where you came from. Family should always share success." I wanted to scream. Share success? Where were they when I was drowning in debt, eating noodles every night, falling asleep in my car after double shifts? They weren't there. But now that the walls were freshly painted, the waiting room full, the money steady, now they wanted in. Finally, they called what they called a family meeting. Everyone showed up. Parents, uncles, cousins. I sat at the head of the table, already exhausted before it began. One by one, they pitched their ideas. My uncle, "Let me handle the business side. I'll take a percentage of profits." My cousin, "Give me a manager role. I don't have experience, but I'll learn fast." My parents, "This clinic should be for the family. Everyone should benefit." It was surreal. Like watching a group of vultures circle a meal they hadn't hunted. For most of the meeting, I stayed quiet, listening, letting them talk. Their words tangled together. Entitlement dressed as tradition. Greed disguised as family. Unity. Finally, I stood. "This clinic is not a family heirloom. It's not a toy. It's not free money. I built this from nothing. Every dollar, every sleepless night, every scar is mine." They shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't stop. "If you want in, you invest, like anyone else. Otherwise, you get nothing. Not a dime, not a title, not even a desk to sit at." The room went quiet. My uncle looked stunned. My cousin turned red. My parents stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Finally, my mother whispered, "You've changed." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, I've grown. And maybe it's time you did too." They left that night grumbling, muttering, about my ego and ingratitude, but I didn't care, because for once I wasn't backing down. This clinic was mine, and no amount of guilt, manipulation, or family politics was going to take it from me. Part 4. The Confrontation. Aftermath. The night of the so-called family meeting ended in silence, but the echoes carried far beyond that dining room. I thought maybe, just maybe, my words would make them pause, make them realize the absurdity of demanding something they hadn't earned. But entitlement doesn't vanish with one speech. It festers. It twists. And soon it turned into something uglier. Gossip. Within days, I started hearing things. A cousin called me quietly. "Hey, just so you know, your uncle's been telling people you're greedy, that you think you're better than everyone else now." Another messaged me. "Your parents are upset. They're saying you've lost respect for family, that you've become cold. Cold. Was I cold when I was working double shifts to pay for tuition? Was I cold when I patched up my old car because I couldn't afford a new one? Was I cold when I slept in my office dreaming of a clinic no one else believed in?" Funny how I was never cold then. But the moment I said no to their demands, suddenly I was heartless. Elise's entry, even Elise, my golden child sister, who had barely acknowledged my work until now, chimed in. She posted on social media. "Some people forget that family made them who they are. Success means nothing if you don't share it." The comments poured in. "So true. Preach. You're right, family first." And there I was, watching strangers validate her post, knowing full well she had never once helped me carry the weight. Not one late night, not $1, not one word of encouragement, my patient's support. But while the gossip spread, something else grew stronger. The support of the people who actually mattered. They didn't know the details, but word of the Yahweh tension leaked out, and more than one person told me, "Don't let anyone take this from you. You built it. We see how much you care." Their words steadied me. Their trust reminded me that my clinic wasn't a bargaining chip in some family drama. It was a lifeline for the community, and that responsibility outweighed any guilt trip my relatives could throw. My parents' visit a week later, my parents showed up at the clinic. They didn't make an appointment. They just walked in, stern-faced, ignoring the receptionist's protests. "We need to talk," my father said, barging into my office. I set down my pen. "About what?" "This attitude," he snapped. "We raised you better than this. Family is supposed to share." I met his gaze calmly. "Family is supposed to support. Did you support me when I was drowning in debt? When I was living off instant noodles? When I was working myself to the bone?" My mother's eyes darted away. My father huffed. "That was your choice. But now you're doing well. And we deserve to benefit too." Deserve. That word lit a fire in my chest. "You don't deserve something you didn't build," I said. "Not from me. Not from anyone." They stormed out, muttering about how ungrateful I was. But for the first time, I didn't chase after them. I didn't try to explain. I let them leave. After that visit, the whispers turned into outright accusations at Crow. Family gatherings I didn't attend, I became the topic of conversation. "She thinks she's too good for us. She wouldn't even be here without us raising her. She owes us everything." But I noticed something interesting. Not everyone agreed. A cousin defended me. "Actually, she built that clinic alone. You weren't there." An aunt countered, "She worked harder than anyone I've seen. Maybe you should respect that." The tide was shifting. Slowly, people were seeing the truth. One night, sitting in my office long after closing, I thought about it all. The sacrifices, the loneliness, the pride of building something from nothing, the entitlement that followed. And I realized I wasn't just protecting a clinic, I was protecting myself. Because giving in wouldn't just mean handing over money or titles. It would mean erasing every night I spent building this alone. It would mean rewriting my story as theirs. I couldn't let that happen, so I made a decision. The clinic would remain mine, fully, entirely, without apology. And anyone who thought they were entitled to it would be met with the same answer: no. The quiet power of boundaries. That night, I locked up the clinic, stood outside under the streetlight, and took a deep breath. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't guilty. I was free. Because here's the thing about boundaries. Once you set them, you stop bleeding for people who never cared when you were hurting. And for the first time in years, I felt unshakable. Part 5, the fallout. When you set boundaries, people don't applaud. They test them, they gossip about them, and eventually, when they realize the boundaries won't bend, they leave. That's exactly what happened after I told my family, once, and for all, that the clinic was mine. At first, they tried the cold shoulder. Family group chats went quiet. Invitations stopped coming. Holidays passed without my phone buzzing. Where once there were endless demands, now there was silence. And you know what? It was peaceful. For years, I'd been dragged into their orbit. Guilt trips, expectations, endless reminders that I owed them. Without that noise, my days felt lighter. My evenings belonged to me again. Silence wasn't punishment. It was freedom. Of course, silence didn't mean surrender. Behind closed doors, they kept talking. At gatherings I didn't attend, my name came up again and again. She thinks she's better than us. She's forgotten her roots. She'll regret cutting out her family. I heard about it through cousins, through distant relatives who weren't sure which side to take, but something fascinating happened. The more they painted me as greedy, the more people started asking questions. Wait, didn't she build that clinic alone? Didn't you all say you couldn't help her when she was struggling? Their narrative began to crumble, because the truth had receipts. Years of sacrifice they couldn't erase with a few bitter comments. While they gossiped, I kept building. The clinic expanded again. A new wing, more staff, upgraded equipment. I hired doctors, nurses, specialists. The waiting room buzzed with life every day. We started offering community programs, free health screenings, educational workshops, partnerships with schools. Patients weren't just coming in for care. They were leaving healthier, more informed, more supported. Every milestone reminded me, this is why I did it. Not for titles, not for family approval, for the people who needed it. And the stronger the clinic grew, the weaker my family's hold on me became. It didn't take long for them to notice the growth. My uncle sent a message. Heard you expanded. Maybe now's the right time to reconsider making this a family business. A cousin emailed me. I've been thinking about a career change. Could you bring me in as a manager? We're family, after all. Even my parents softened their tone. We just want to be part of your success. Don't shut us out. But by then, the answer was automatic. No, not with anger, not with bitterness, just clarity. Because I realized something important. Once you build something on your own, you never owe it to people who refuse to help when it mattered. One evening, I stayed late at the clinic. The halls were quiet, the rooms clean, the air humming with the faint sound of machines. I walked through each room, remembering what it looked like in the beginning. Peeling paint, mismatched chairs, equipment held together by tape and faith, and then I thought of that family meeting, of the demands, of the entitlement. It hit me like a wave. They didn't want the clinic because they cared about its mission. They wanted it because it was shiny, successful, profitable. They didn't want to build. They wanted to take, and that's when I realized they could never truly own this. Not even if I handed them the keys, because ownership isn't paperwork. Ownership is sacrifice. Ownership is sleeping in your office when you can't afford rent. Ownership is working 16-hour days and still showing up with a smile. They never paid that price. And they never will. In the end, my revenge wasn't loud. I didn't cut them down publicly. I didn't fight them at every turn. I simply lived well without them. And the more they gossiped, the more obvious it became to everyone else. Their bitterness was proof of their failure, and my success was proof of my resilience. They had erased themselves from my story, and I wasn't going back to write them in. Part 6. Independence. The silence from my relatives, once deafening, turned into music. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under the constant shadow of guilt. I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, and I wasn't bending over backward to prove I deserved a place in their story. Instead, I was writing my own. Rediscovering myself. When the noise of family pressure faded, I noticed something strange. I didn't actually know what peace felt like. At first, the quiet made me restless. I was so used to running, to grinding, to constantly explaining myself, that sitting still felt unnatural. But little by little, I filled that space with things that mattered. I started hiking again. Long walks in the woods where no one asked me for favors. I joined community groups not because it would look good, but because I wanted connection. I learned how to cook real meals again, not just survive on vending machine dinners. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was living. The funny thing about stepping away from toxic family ties is that you discover something beautiful. Family doesn't have to be blood. My staff at the clinic became like siblings. We celebrated birthdays together, laughed through stressful shifts, supported each other when life got hard. Patients brought homemade food as thank yous, dropping off casseroles and cookies that reminded me of the warmth I craved as a kid. One elderly patient said something that stuck with me. "You've given us a home here. Don't ever let anyone take that from you." In that moment, I realized I had more family in my waiting room than I ever had around my parents' dinner table. I used to think boundaries meant walls, cold, harsh barriers that shut people out. But I learned that real boundaries are doors. They let in the people who respect you and keep out the ones who don't. And once those doors were locked to entitlement, my world filled with people who actually valued me. No one at the clinic cared about my bank account. They cared about my effort. My patients didn't applaud my surname. They thanked me for showing up. It was simple, pure, real. Watching them from afar. Meanwhile, my relatives kept posting their lives online. The perfect dinners, the family gatherings, the smiling photos where I no longer appeared. But I noticed something. The smiles looked tighter. The captions read more like defenses than celebrations. And the comments kept asking, "Where are you?" My absence haunted them more than my presence ever did, because when I was there, they could dismiss me, ignore me, use me. But when I left, they couldn't control the narrative. The hole I left in their picture was undeniable. As the clinic continued to grow, opportunities came knocking, partnerships, community awards, even invitations to speak at events. Every step forward reminded me, I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to share my success with people who only showed up after the hard part was done. I was enough. My work was enough, and that realization was more valuable than any inheritance, any surname, any so-called family legacy. One evening, I closed the clinic after a long but fulfilling day. I stood outside under the fading sun, keys in hand, and just breathed. For once, I wasn't thinking about who I needed to please. I wasn't bracing for criticism or guilt. I was proud. Quietly, deeply proud. And I knew something with certainty. I would never go back. Never again would I let myself be cornered into giving away the fruits of my labor. Never again would I beg for respect from people who refused to give it. My peace was mine. My independence was mine. And for the first time, that was enough. Here's the truth I discovered. The sweetest victory isn't proving your family wrong. It's proving to yourself that you never needed their approval to begin with. That's independence, not loneliness, not bitterness. Independence. And it tastes better than any apology they'll never give. When I look back now, I don't see just a clinic. I see a battlefield. Every scar, every sleepless night, every loan payment, every tear shed in exhaustion. They were my weapons, my armor, my victories, and when my family tried to claim it without, ever fighting beside me, I realized something I should have known all along. They weren't entitled to the spoils of a war they never waged. What they thought, to my relatives, my success looked easy. They only saw the after picture, the full waiting rooms, the polished walls, the articles in the local paper. They thought success was like fruit hanging from a tree, free to grab if you happen to be standing nearby. They forgot that trees only bear fruit after years of roots digging deep into soil, years of storms survived, years of growth unseen, and they hadn't planted, watered, or tended anything. They just showed up at harvest, hands outstretched. By demanding ownership, they lost something far more valuable: access to me. They could have been welcomed into my world, not as owners, but as loved ones. They could have enjoyed the pride of cheering me on, of celebrating milestones, of knowing they stood by me. Instead, they chose entitlement over support, greed over gratitude. And when I said no, they weren't just cut off from profits, they were cut off from me. I gained something. Priceless. Clarity. Clarity that family isn't about bloodlines or surnames. It's about respect, clarity that sacrifice can't be borrowed, begged, or stolen. It has to be lived. Clarity that boundaries don't make you cruel, they make you free. And most of all, I gained peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stop bleeding for people who never offered a bandage in return. The lesson for them. My family may never admit it, but deep down, they learned something too. They learned that raising me wasn't the same as investing in my clinic. That guilt, trips don't pay rent. That entitlement is the fastest way to lose access to the very thing you crave. They learned that love cannot be demanded after years of absence, and though they may never say it aloud, the silence between us speaks volumes. But the most important lesson was mine. I learned that saying no is not selfish. It is survival. No to guilt, no to manipulation, no to the rewriting of my story into something I didn't live. And with every no, I carved out a stronger yes. Yes to myself, yes to my peace, yes to the life I built with my own two hands. So if you've ever been pressured to give away the fruits of your labor to people who never planted the seeds, remember this. You don't owe anyone your success just because they share your last name. You don't owe them a seat at a table they never helped build. You don't owe them a dime of a dream they never believed in. You owe yourself peace. Because, in the end, the sweetest revenge isn't shutting the door in their faces. It's opening that door every morning to a life that is fully, wholly yours, and knowing that no one, no matter how entitled, can take it away. Blood may make you related, but respect makes you family. Never feel guilty for protecting what you've built, especially when those who ignored your struggle try to feast on your success. You don't owe anyone the fruits of a tree they never planted.